Hello.
Who are you?
I am Emma Dumain, as you were just informed. This is Congresswoman Nikki Budzinski. We are
Hello.
so happy to have you.
Thanks for having me, Emma.
today.
Yeah.
So I want to tell everyone about you. Congresswoman Budzinski is a first-term House member, but she has a long history in Democratic politics, and specifically in bringing together the climate movement and the labor movement. She was Hillary Clinton's labor director in the 2016 campaign, where she met one of her mentors, who you might be familiar with. His name is John Podesta, who, as we know, is now the top advisor in the White House for IRA implementation and international climate policy. She also played a big role in helping Illinois, the state we're all in, pass the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which is this landmark legislation that required buy-in from unions that were needed to get on board with making sure that the clean energy transition facilitated by this piece of legislation incorporated union jobs and provided necessary workforce training. So on Capitol Hill, you'll see her on the House Agriculture Committee, and she also leads the House Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition's Clean Jobs Task Force. So it's quite a resume, and we're going to get started. So tonight, obviously, Kamala Harris is going to formally accept the nomination for president.
Yeah.
You worked on the last presidential campaign where a woman, Hillary Clinton, was the lead on the ticket. I'd love to ask how you think, and do you think, attitudes have changed about women in politics from last time to this current moment?
Yeah, I think, as now a woman elected official, we all, each of us, stand on the shoulders of the women that have come before us, right? And so I think what's so special and historic about Kamala Harris's nomination tonight is not just that she's the first woman, the woman of color that is going to be our nominee as president, is that she too, like all of us, really stand on the shoulders of other great women, whether it's Shirley Chisholm or whether it's Hillary Clinton, Geraldine Ferraro. There were a lot of fantastic women leaders that really helped pave that way. And so I think that, I think as time has evolved, I think her uniquely being our first female vice president, I think has really well equipped her for the experience that she's going to need to be an effective president. I think also the fact that she has really excellent statewide experience, being an elected attorney general from California, being a United States senator from California. This is a woman that has a lot of experience and knowledge in how the federal government operates. And so I think that also helps because, we always talk about breaking that glass ceiling. And certainly having had the opportunity to work for Hillary Clinton, she put a million cracks in that glass ceiling. But I do think that Vice President Harris is going to finally be the woman that breaks through.
I also want to ask you about your work in getting a new national monument designated, which is actually no small feat. To have the president use his executive authority to protect a historic piece of land rather than have it go through the legislative process. And that's the site of the 1908 Springfield race riot.
Right.
Can you talk about how that ended up coming together? Again, it's not easy to do.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. So this just happened actually last Friday, not even a week ago. I was in the Oval Office with both of our senators, Senator Duckworth and Senator Durbin, who had been working on this issue for quite some time prior to me coming into Congress. And it was a really special, incredibly special moment. Friday of last week marked 41 days in the community of Springfield. Sonia Massey, national news, was murdered by a deputy sheriff in our community. Right. And so to know we are a community grieving, we are a community that still has a lot of progress to still make as it relates to equity and justice and accountability. The fact that we were in the White House then, only 41 days later, to see the President of the United States use the Antiquities Act to memorialize a very important, painful part of our history in Springfield, which was the site of the 1908 race riot. I do want to say, first of all, we did try it legislatively.
Yes.
The Senate did actually get it out of the Senate, but unfortunately, House Republican leadership had made the decision that they're not taking up any type of monument designations like this. And so even though I had a bipartisan co-lead with Congressman Darren LaHood, it was very clear we were not going to be able to get it out of the Natural Resources Committee because of GOP leadership. So we then moved to kind of the second phase, which was because I had had the opportunity to work in this administration prior to running for office. I was the chief of staff at OMB, really leaned on my relationships within the White House to be an advocate for the site of the 1908 race riot, knowing that the president would have this authority under the Antiquities Act to memorialize it into the National Park Service. We got to work on that on day one. And I want to take, if you don't mind, just a minute to talk about also why it is so important. It's important first and foremost to tell a truthful, honest history of all of our communities, and that we have the opportunity to learn from our past, even when it's a painful past, to make sure that we're creating a future that is a more just, a brighter future for everyone. So that is obviously first and foremost very important. But second, out of the tragedy that happened in 1908, a year later in New York, the NAACP was founded because a group of civil rights leaders came together in New York to say, if something like this can happen in Abraham Lincoln's hometown, this can happen anywhere. And we need to do something. We need to mobilize and organize. And out of that came the birth of the largest national civil rights organization, the NAACP. So the monument is important for that reason. And I also would mention it's the first time in our country's history that the site of a lynching becomes memorialized as a part of the National Park Service. So that obviously opens the door to other opportunities across the country to memorialize other sites like that. And so it was important from a national perspective, a local perspective in Springfield, especially given all of the heavy news and the tragedy that we've recently faced, even just within the last month with Sonia Massey's murder. So this was a really special moment for us in Illinois, and so grateful to the president for utilizing his ability to do that.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective and those inside details on how all of that came together. I want to pivot in the very short amount of time we have left, unfortunately, to the IRA and messaging about the Inflation Reduction Act on the campaign in this political moment. Democrats and climate advocates have been talking about how important it is for the White House and for the purposes of holding the White House and for the purposes of Democrats expanding the majority in Congress, how important it is to lean on the achievements in the Inflation Reduction Act. But a lot of people have also been pretty clear-eyed about the fact that it may not be working the way people are messaging on it. How do you think Democrats are messaging on the IRA, and what do they need to say about it, and how do they need to talk about it to be successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of my constituents in central and southern Illinois probably don't know what the Inflation Reduction Act is. That's kind of DC jargon, right? But when you localize it and you talk about projects that are happening in the district, jobs that are being created, which are happening in central and southern Illinois, my constituents get it. We have one of the largest solar projects, a double black diamond solar project in my district that is going to put hundreds of people to work, is going to power 100,000 homes, which is for when it's fully built. One of the largest projects, only made possible by the Inflation Reduction Act. I serve on the House Agriculture Committee, and I know you're going to get a chance to hear from our wonderful chairwoman of the Senate, Senator Stabenow. I serve on that committee, and one of the more important components of what's being negotiated in that farm bill is conservation. Conservation dollars that are only made possible, additional resources out of the Inflation Reduction Act. Because of the Inflation Reduction Act, we were able to move $14 billion into the Farm Bill for agricultural climate-smart conservation practices. And why that's important, my farmers are taking advantage of that on a daily basis. They have, we have more need than we have funding for conservation programs. And when we're talking about creating new markets for farmers, and farmers get that, creating new markets, we need to be able to utilize conservation dollars to unlock the potential of sustainable aviation fuel for biofuels. We have some of the most fertile soil in the entire country right here in central and southern Illinois. How do we protect that? How do we grow more resilient, climate resilient crops here in the Midwest? that kind of work is only going to be made possible from dollars out of the Inflation Reduction Act. So I try to more specifically point to what the bill has funded, how it wouldn't have been possible without that, rather than using kind of the jargon of our legislative language of Inflation Reduction Act. It's the same as chips and science. I mean, we've had some great opportunities to bring manufacturing back, but I talk about projects locally, and I think that helps connect with people.
So I think, unfortunately, we have time for one more question. And the question is, it's not a real, I feel like it's not a real, banger of a question to end this, but I want to know how you think implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act is going, and if you think there's room for improvement, particularly how the IRA is being treated in the union and the labor community. I know that's something that you've been sort of a watchdog on as implementation has continued.
Well, I think it's completely true that President Biden has been the most pro-union president probably since FDR. So there are really good labor standards on all of the dollars of the Inflation Reduction Act. So we're not just creating jobs in our community, but we're creating good paying union jobs. And I think that's been a priority of this administration. And we're seeing that play out. I'm seeing that play out through job opportunities in my district. I think when you ask, though, about implementation, I think that is really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. I mean, passing the bill is no small task, but the implementation is really where you see effective action and implementation actually really come to fruition. And so I think there are things like, I've been a big advocate for sustainable aviation fuel. The administration put some initial guidance out on 40B. I've been very clear, I think it's a little too restrictive. We need more flexibility as we're looking at those dollars and how farmers can take advantage of tax credits that are a part of the Inflation Reduction Act. So we're leaning on the administration to put out that second iteration of regulation, which is 45Z, which we're hoping is going to create more flexibility, more opportunity. So it's hard to get everything perfect right the first time, but I think you want an administration, and I believe that's what we'll get with Vice President Harris, is one that we can work with as we're continuing to implement. And one of the things that is at stake, I think, in this election is former President Donald Trump would have no interest in continuing the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act and utilizing these dollars. And so for all the progress we have been able to make since its passage, we would see us again going back on really trying to make the most significant investment in climate and addressing the climate crisis in our country's history. So do we continue? I mean, that's the theme, I guess. Do we continue to go forward, or are we going backwards?
I do want to ask quickly, because we have just one more minute, is 18 Republicans recently signed onto a letter asking their leadership not to touch these suite of clean energy tax credits included in the Inflation Reduction Act as more IRA money has gone into red districts. If Trump wins, if there is a red wave in November, do those Republicans give you hope that maybe that portion of the IRA could be spared?
You said there's 18 of them? So I guess I would take more comfort in knowing if there was more than just 18. I think it's great that there are 18 that are speaking out, and that I can appreciate is not actually easy to do. But I do think that, I would need to see more of a majority speaking out to really be able to give me any comfort that leadership was going to listen, leadership was going to take really, pay mind and attention to making sure we're protecting those dollars. So. Yeah, well, I'm a little skeptical is all I guess I'd say.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that perspective. A lot of hay has been made about, wow, 18 Republicans, but, depending on the math at the end of the election, we're going to have to see how the margins shape up.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for.
Okay.
But it was so great talking to you. It was so great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Emma.